Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories, where we play tales to take you away from today. Monsters, black-eyed kids, and mysteries are just some of what you can expect on today's show.
Wow!
I know. Also, we have another installment of Growing Up with Tom Williams and a special State of Washington edition of
Johnny, is this true?
Yep, you heard it here first. So, let's start with a spiderweb of intrigue in this 5-minute mystery.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by spiders and their amazing webs. Humans have been making use of spider silk for thousands of years. The ancient Greek used them to stop bleeding, and the Aborigines of Australia used silk as fishing lines. It is an incredibly strong and versatile material.
This has been your noonday program of news. The weather for this afternoon is cloudy and overcast, with probably showers this evening.
Why do you bother with that radio, Wrighton? There's never anything new.
What else is there to do around a firehouse, Edens?
Sleep and go to fires.
We'll be going to enough fires, all right, if they don't catch that arsonist who's been trying to burn up the whole city.
Yeah, I'd like to get my hands on that devil.
Maybe we will, Edens. Maybe we will.
Holy smoke, here we go again.
Watch that baby burn.
Looks like the end of the world, doesn't it?
If they don't get their bloodhounds after that firebug, it soon will be.
Hey, who's that guy the chief's dragging along here?
I don't know, but he's really got a grip on his arm.
Maybe it's the firebug.
Hey, Chief, who's the man you're holding?
The rat who's been setting all these fires.
Where are you taking him?
Down to the station. Put out this blaze and hurry along.
You hear that, Wrighton? Pour on the water. I want to see a firebug get singed.
You still deny that you set that fire?
Let me call my lawyer. You can't question me this way. It's illegal.
Let me go to work on him, Chief.
That won't be necessary, Edens. I'm sure this prolific arsonist will come clean in just a few minutes.
You got no proof?
You were seen running out of the burning building just as the engines pulled up. How did the fire start?
Listen, pal, I tell you I don't know. Now will you let me go?
Why did you wait till the fire had gained so much headway before you finally ran out?
I just woke up and I heard your sirens drawing near the building.
Listen, my friend. We're out to break this cycle of arson that's been slowly destroying the city. You're in for some pretty rough weather ahead unless you come clean and tell me how that fire started. The sooner you give me the truth, the easier it'll go with you.
All right, Chief, I'll play ball with you. The whole fire was an accident.
What?
Yeah, I swear it was. I really went in there to get some sleep. And when I woke up, I lit a cigarette. That was my big mistake. The building was so old it was almost falling apart, and there were cobwebs hanging all over the place. While I was shaking out the flame of the match, it hit some of the cobwebs hanging from the low beams, and that was it. Webs caught fire and spread to the roof, and the dry wood began to burn in a flash.
What do we do now, Chief?
Take him to the police and book him on a charge of arson. His story shows that he deliberately set that fire.
What lie in the firebug's story did the chief detect? In just a moment, we'll know, but first...
But this time we have a pretty laid out story. In fact, we have a confession. The question is, was it an accident or a crime? What is the contingent factor that would prove guilt or innocence? What do you say we go and find out?
And now, back to our story.
What are you talking about, Chief? I told you it was an accident.
If it was, you would have told a different story. You see, there was one very important flaw in your story that condemned it as a lie.
Prove it.
You said that the cobwebs caught fire and spread to the roof. Well, I'm afraid that isn't quite accurate. Unfortunately for you, cobwebs don't flame. All right, boys, take him away. Our firebug needs cooling off.
Cobwebs don't burn. That means he was lying and, of course, makes him guilty. Now, you know me, and I had to know, do cobwebs burn? Well, spider silk does shrivel quite rapidly when exposed to intense heat, so yes, a flamethrower can clear out cobwebs. But it doesn't actually burn, much less cause the pyrotechnics that people have come to expect in fiction. How about that?
What's that you say?
I have to say thank you. Last week I told you about our pitfalls with Twitter. You responded, and we have bounced back to 451 followers. Please continue this resurgence and get that number back to where it was. Just head to RAS Podcast on Twitter. Also last week, I asked you guys to take the RAS survey. This will help me add a sponsor to pay the cost of servers and hardware. 2 of you did that, and whoever you are, I thank you. You can help with this by taking the listener survey. It takes about 5 minutes to complete and asks questions about you, but requires no personal information. You can find a link to the survey at ronsamazingstories.com. Just a reminder, I'm planning a special military episode of the podcast. If you have a story about your time, a relative's time, or any interesting story about the military, please share it with us. It can be funny, sad, or exciting. Anything works. And now, these are your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
We have one tale this week, but it is amazing. A few weeks ago, I received this comment from the website. Hello, I love the podcast and just have to share a story with you. I first heard you on Jim Harold's Campfire, which is my all-time favorite podcast. I wanted to tell my story on his show, but I don't talk well. In fact, I have been diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome with complex tics. I have drugs and therapy to help me in my daily life, but I never really know when a fit will overtake me. I'm a happy individual and have a great life. People around me know of my troubles, but sharing on live radio is not something I'm comfortable with. When I heard that you read your stories from your listeners, it was a dream come true. So, I give you a story that happened to my wife and I on our honeymoon. Logan Taylor, Yuma, Arizona. Well, Logan, it is an amazing story, and as you might gather, you're about to hear it. This is a flat-out frightening tale and is very intense. I've only had to say this one time before on the show, and that is to parents I say, small children beware. One of the rarest types of stories in the paranormal are about black-eyed kids, BEKs. However, this has been changing, and they seem to be happening more often now. Websites have been popping up as people share these stories and about encountering, for lack of a better description, these creatures. The Taylor story is a BEK tale. They call it Terror at Alamo Lake, and I have edited this with their approval. Terror at Alamo Lake, experienced by the Taylors. Early last year, my wife and I were married. We both love ghost stories and decided for our honeymoon we would travel to the known ghost towns of Arizona. Something both of us have wanted to do since we started dating. I definitely did anyway. Let me tell you about Arizona's ghost towns. Wikipedia lists over 100 of them in our state alone, And this shouldn't come as any surprise. Because of the great gold rush of the 1800s, there were hundreds of little towns that failed after the gold petered out. But not all of these were of any interest to us because we only wanted to investigate those with strong paranormal activities. One of these towns was Alamo Crossing. This town was unique because it had nothing to do with the gold rush. Alamo Crossing is a ghost town in Mohave County that was settled in the late 1890s. The town's death was due to it being submerged in order to create Alamo Lake. Many ghostly tales come from this area, including the woman in white who is said to wander the shores looking for home, which is why we added it to our list. After we were all settled at our lodgings, we made the drive out to Alamo Crossing. On first appearances, it's just a lake, but the remnants of the town are still visible. Rusted old trucks, scarred buildings, and a fenced-off area where the blacksmith shop was are all that is left. We had a great time looking around. No ghosts, but we did have a scare or two as we found snakes and a coyote den. We were heading back to the car when I spotted a child standing near an old pickup truck. I thought how strange for a kid to be here. My wife insisted that we go to the child and see if he was in any kind of trouble. When we got to the pickup, there was no one there. We looked around, and then a voice came from behind us. "I need a ride into town. Can you help me?" We both turned and saw the child, and while I can't say how my wife felt, my knees almost buckled, and I felt a wave of nausea. What I saw was something right out of Stephen King's Children of the Corn. He stood about 4 feet tall, wore ragged clothes, and had a wide-brim hat like the Quakers wear. However, it was his eyes that drew my attention. They were as black as night and seemed to look right through to my very soul. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, so there was no reason for the child's eyes to be so dilated. In fact, I remember looking at my wife to see if she was seeing this, and how blue her eyes were in contrast. He repeated, "Can you help me?" The voice. It was so creepy. I wanted to run and felt the urge to do so, but it was my wife that spoke. "What's wrong, honey?" With that, the boy turned and started to walk towards our car. We both looked at each other and followed. When we all arrived, the boy just pointed and again repeated, "Can you help me?" Warning bells went off in my head. A voice was screaming, "You cannot help this child. Get in the car and drive away now." My wife reached out for the child. He immediately recoiled and started screaming and then ran around our car in circles. It was a crazy sight. With each passing revolution, he went faster and faster. Finally, he broke off from this orbit and ran off into the scrubland. We tried to follow, but it was as if he had vanished. We got into the car and drove out of there. It was shortly before dark when we arrived at our motel. As we got to our cabin, the little boy was waiting for us. He made some gestures that indicated that he was hungry and then pointed to our cabin. I had had enough at this point and flat out told him to go away and not come back. His eyes darkened. How that was possible, I have no idea. He stormed away, obviously frustrated. I don't know why, but after he was gone, I felt as if part of me was taken. I still feel this way today, several weeks later. My wife has told me that she only feels dread and knows that someday that little boy will be back. This thought scares us both, and we stay vigilant, watching out for the little devil. One last thought on this, probably not related. A few weeks after the event, we found out that we were pregnant with a boy. Logan Taylor Yuma, Arizona. Man, that was hard to read. I found myself stopping often to shake off the chills. Thank you for sharing what must not have been an easy story to write. There are few things that terrify me like stories about black-eyed kids. They all seem to have the same general theme, which is why I think there's something to them. I personally hope that there's no connection between your encounter and expected child. Please take care and be safe. I really do mean that. Okay, we love our music here on Ron's Amazing Stories, and it, too, can tell a story. A few weeks back, Kevin MacLeod joined us just to chat, and one of the things he mentioned was his brand new site, freepd.com. I love this place and have spent some time there just going through the music. I found this tune just sitting there and thought that a musical interlude was just the thing. So, here is Sunday Dub, written and performed by Kevin MacLeod. And now,
Johnny, is this true?
okay, I like to surf the internet looking for stories and other oddities. I do this in the name of the podcast, but the truth is, it's fun to see what's out there. What you're about to hear is what I call...
Johnny, is this true?
I will tell you a story and then ask the question, did I make it up or is it true? Let's get started. This time we have stories from my home state of Washington. So, let's get started. Story 1. Usually when moving cars and pedestrians collide, the walker ends up seriously injured. This time, Bellevue police say that the pedestrian was in the wrong after he ran into the side of a moving Tesla SUV. The man was thrown back into the crosswalk, but jumped to his feet and fled the scene on his skateboard. The Tesla, however, apparently didn't fare as well. There was significant damage to the side of the vehicle. The man was sought by police for this crime and was arrested. Now this has to be a pile of dung, right? Wrong. This was actually a crime since all parties must stop and exchange information, and that includes pedestrians. Bellevue police released the video of the incident, and it clearly shows a person dressed in black anxiously waiting to cross the street. Suddenly, the pedestrian crouches down and sprints across the intersection, nearly making it to the opposite curb. But the Tesla appears, and the pedestrian runs smack into the driver's door. I'll have a link to this video in the show notes. It truly is amazing. Sam Fuller of Seattle, Washington, sent this one in. Sam writes, a woman was seen strapped to the hood of a car. The driver was making her way around the city as if proud to show off his skill as a hunter. Many saw the horrific sight and called the police. The Seattle Police Department, using tips from callers, quickly tracked down the vehicle and apprehended the driver. Now, is Sam making this one up, or did the guy really do this? Well, if you said that this is fact, then you got it right. It appears it was a promotional stunt to get people to go to a fishing and hunting show that was planned for that weekend. Ticket sales had been light, so they came up with this scheme to promote it. In the end, it worked. The show was a success and offered selfies with the car and/or woman. Nutty, to say the least. Story 3. This next story also comes from Seattle, Washington. Perhaps it shouldn't come as any surprise that there is a lot of tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, in Seattle's water. After all, it's the largest city in a state that has legalized recreational marijuana. But studies have shown the levels of THC are so high that Seattle ranks as number 1 in the world. Now, is this one true? By all that's holy and just, this one's a fact. That's what the new University of Washington study on drug use found. Based on current science, it appears that the level of carboxy-THC was the highest detected in the world. UW researchers in 2016 tested Seattle's wastewater to get an idea of how prevalent marijuana usage is. They found that the rate of THC in Seattle's water is about 416 milligrams per 1,000 people. A joint with a gram of marijuana will likely contain, on average, 18 milligrams of THC. Seattle's population in 2017 stands at about 704,000 people, which means that there's an estimated 300,000 milligrams of THC in total in Seattle's water. That's about 1,700 individual joints, if my math is correct. How about that? Story 4. Our last story comes from Edgewood, Washington. A woman drove her car into the Pierce County Sheriff's Station there and then tried to melt the deputies with holy water. She believed that they were devils. The incident happened on a Sunday morning when an SUV rammed into the garage at the Edgewood Police Station. The deputy on duty walked outside and saw a red Ford Expedition backing into the garage. When he approached the SUV, he saw that the woman inside was holding a box cutter, a wooden staff, and a bottle of water. She told the officer that she was fleeing from Satan and believed that the police station was holy ground. Now, did this story happen, or is this a deviltry of a different type? Sadly, this one is true. While the officer talked to the woman, fellow patrolmen were able to disable her vehicle. She kept warning that she would douse the officers with holy water to melt them. Sergeant Glenn Carpenter asked the woman to splash him with water to prove he wouldn't melt. She held up the holy water and threatened again to melt Carpenter. He told her again, douse me with the water. And she did. Carpenter later wrote in the report of the incident, I didn't melt. She continued to fight the officers and rant about devils, but in the end gave up and was taken in for psychological treatment. Do you have any strange but true stories you want to share? If you do, send them to ronsamazingstories@gmail.com, and I'll use them if I can. On last week's podcast, we listened to Chapter 2 of Anything You Can Do by Randall Garrett. I asked the question if we wanted to continue the book or move on to something else. I received several responses from folks that said we should continue the book. This is a classic science fiction story written by Garrett and published in 1963. We have heard chapters 1 and 2. In the story so far, we met an alien called a Nipe. His spaceship was struck by an object and crash-landed on a distant planet. He had his first encounter with humankind in the form of a park ranger by the name Wang Kulichenko, who the Nipe quickly killed. We continue now with the story and Chapter 3 of the book, Anything You Can Do, read for us by Mark Nelson.
Chapter 3 of Anything You Can Do by Randall Garrett. The Nipe stood quietly for a moment, looking down at the thing he had killed. His stomach churned with disgust. He ignored the fading hoofbeats of the slave animal from which he had knocked the thing that lay on the ground with a crushed skull. The slave animal was unintelligent and unimportant. This had been, the intelligent one. But so slow, so incredibly slow, and so weak and soft. It seemed impossible that such a poorly equipped beast could have survived long enough on any world to become the dominant life form. Then again, perhaps it was not the dominant form. Perhaps it was merely a higher form of slave animal. He would have to do more investigating. He picked up the weapon the thing had been carrying and examined it carefully. The mechanism was unfamiliar, but a glance at the muzzle told him it was a projectile weapon of some sort. The spiraling grooves in the barrel were obviously intended to impart a spin to the projectile, to give it gyroscopic stability while in flight. He tossed the weapon aside. Now there was a certain compassion in his thoughts as he looked again at the dead thing. It must surely have thought it was faced with a wild animal, the Nipe decided. Surely no being would carry a weapon for use against members of its own or another intelligent species. He examined the rest of the equipment on the thing. There was very little further information. The fabric in which it wrapped itself was crude, but ingeniously put together, and its presence indicated that the being needed some sort of protection against the temperature. It appeared to have a thermal insulating quality. Evidently, the creature was used to a warmer climate. That served as additional information to help substantiate his observation from space that the areas farther south were the ones containing the major centers of population. The tilt of this planet on its axis would tend to give the weather a cyclic variation, but it appeared that the areas around the poles remained fairly cold, even when the incidence of radiation from the primary was at maximum. It would have been good, he decided, if he had stopped the slave animal. There had been more equipment on the thing's back which would have given him more information upon which to base a judgment as to the level of civilization of the dead being. That, however, was no longer practicable, so he dismissed the thought from his mind. The next question was, what should he do with the body? Should he dispose of it properly, as one should with a validly slain foe? It didn't seem that he could do anything else, and yet his stomach wanted to rebel at the thought. After all, it wasn't as if the thing were really a proper being. It was astonishing to find another intelligent race. None had ever been found before, although the existence of such had been postulated. There were certain criteria that must be met by any such beings, however. It must have manipulatory organs, such as this being very obviously did have, organs very much like his own. But there were only two, which argued that the being lacked dexterity. The organs for walking were encased in protective clothing too stiff to allow them to be used as manipulators. He ripped off one of the boots and looked at the exposed foot. The thumb was not opposed. Obviously, such an organ was not much good for manipulation. He pried open the eating orifice and inspected it carefully. Ah, the creature was omnivorous, judging by its teeth. There were both rending and grinding teeth. That certainly argued for intelligence, since it showed that the being could behave in a gentlemanly fashion. Still, it was not conclusive. If they were intelligent, it was most certainly necessary for him to show that he was also civilized and a gentleman. On the other hand, the slowness and lack of strength of this particular specimen argued that the species was of a lower order than the Nipe, which made the question even more puzzling. In the end, the question was rendered unnecessary for the time being, since the problem was taken out of his hands. A sound came from the ground a few yards away. It was an insistent buzzing. Cautiously, the Nipe approached the thing. Buzz, 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 buzz. It was an instrument of some kind. He recognized it as the device that he had seen the dead being speak into while he himself had been watching from the concealment of the undergrowth, trying to decide whether or not to approach. The device was obviously a communicator of some kind, and someone at the other end was trying to make contact. If it were not answered, whoever was calling would certainly deduce that something had gone wrong at this end, and of course there was no way for it to be answered. It would be necessary then to leave the body here for others of its kind to find. Doubtless they would dispose of it properly. He would have to leave quickly. It was necessary that he find one of their centers of production or supply, and he would have to do it alone, with only the equipment he had on him. The utter destruction of his ship had left him seriously hampered. He began moving, staying in the protection of the trees. He had no way of knowing whether investigators would come by air or on the slave animals, and there was no point in taking chances. His sense of ethics still bothered him. It was not at all civilized to leave a body at the mercy of lesser animals or monocells in that fashion. What kind of monster would they think he was? Still, there was no help for it. If they caught him, they might think him a lower animal and shoot him. He would not have put an onus like that upon them. He moved on. First interlude. The big man with the tiny child on his shoulder pushed through the air curtain that kept the warm, humid air out of the shop. "There," he said to the little boy softly, turning his head to look up into the round, chubby, smiling face. "There. Isn't that nicer, huh? Isn't that better than that hot old air outside?" "Gleefula," said the child with a grin. "Oh, come on, boy. I've heard you manage bigger words than that. Or is it your brother?" He chuckled and headed toward the drug counter. "Hey, Jim!" The big man brought himself up short and turned, carefully, so as not to jiggle the baby on his shoulder. When he saw the shorter, thinner man, he grinned hugely. "Jinx! By God, Jinx! Watch it! Don't shake the hand too hard or I'll drop this infant. Damn, man, I thought you were in Siberia." "I was, Jim, but a man can't stay in Siberia forever. Is that minuscule lump of humanity your own?" Yep. So I've been led to believe. Say hello to your Uncle Jinx, young'un. Come on, say hello." The child jammed the 3 fingers of his left hand into his mouth and refused to say a word. His eyes widened with an unfathomable baby emotion. "Well, he's got your eyes," said the thinner man. "Fortunately, he's going to look like his mother instead of being ugly. He is a he, isn't he?" "That's right. Mother's looks, father's plumbing. I got another just like him, but his mother's taking the other one to the doctor to get rid of the sniffles. Don't want this one to catch it." "Twins?" "Naw," said the big man sarcastically. "Octuplets. The government took 75% for taxes." "Ask a silly question, get a silly answer," the smaller man said philosophically. "Yup. So, how's the great northern wasteland, Jinx?" "Cold," said Jinx. "But it's not going to be a wasteland much longer, Jim. Those Martian trees are going to be a big business in 15 years. There'll be forests all over the tundra. They'll make a hell of a fine income crop for those people. We've put in over 5,000 square miles in seedlings during the past 5 years. The first ones will be ready to harvest in 10 years, and from then on, it will be as regular as clockwork." "That's great! Great! How long will you be in town, Jinx?" "About a week. Then I've got to head back to Siberia." "Well, look, could you drop around some evening? We could kill off a few bottles of beer after we eat one of Ellen's dinners. How about it?" "I'd love to. Sure. Ellen won't mind?" "She'll be tickled pink to see you. How about Wednesday?" "Sure. I'm free Wednesday evening. But you ask Ellen first. I'll give you a call tomorrow evening to make sure I won't get a chair thrown at me when I come in the door." "Great. I'll let her do the inviting then." "Look," Jinx said, "I've got half an hour or so right now. Let me buy you a beer. Or don't you want to take the baby in?" "No, it's not that, but I've got to run. I just dropped in to get a couple of things, then I have to get on out to the plant. Some piddling little thing came up and they want to talk to me about it." He patted the baby's leg. "Nothing personal, pal," he said in a soft aside. "You take the baby into an atomic synthesis plant?" Jinx asked. "Why not? It's safe as houses. You've still got the Holocaust jitters, my friend. He'll be safer there than at home. Besides, I can't just leave him in a locker, can I?" "I guess not. Just don't let him get his genes irradiated," Jinx said, grinning. "So long. I'll call tomorrow at 2000. "Fine. See you then. So long." The big man adjusted the load on his shoulder and went on toward the counter. End of Chapter 3.
Next week we will continue with this book and Mark's excellent reading of it. I have set up a special web page with all the chapters we've read so far. I will keep that updated so that if you miss anything or want to hear it again, you can catch up to this story. The link for this page will be on the show notes, which can be found at ronsamazingstories.com. Thank you for your feedback on this one. I too am enjoying the story.
As read by Amazing Stories, read by amazing people.
This time on As Read By, we have the next installment of Growing Up with Tom Williams. This time, Tom tells us about Southern drive-ins, and I have to say, this might be my favorite one yet.
Growing up and outdoor movies. You know, the construction of the drive-in movie was the greatest thing for us kids, at least in the beginning. The first drive-in movie I ever saw wasn't completely thought out by its owners, at least not in my mind. It was named the Do Drive In. That I like. It could have been a moneymaker if it weren't for a couple of bad ideas. It was constructed about a mile from grandmother's house. That wasn't a mistake and was great for all the kids in the neighborhood. No, we didn't have cars at that tender age, but let me explain. First thing is, when you construct something like that, you, yes, build it on a major road with easy access, but no, don't have the giant screen facing the road. There were major problems with car parking and people standing outside the roadside watching the movie for free. The police were continually running people off. It was a major traffic problem for a long time, to say the least. The property was completely without any fence. The first year, the kids in the neighborhood could freely walk in and watch the movie, and it was permitted. Then the owner got wise and made the kids pay a nominal entrance fee. That is, until he had to build a 10-foot fence around the area to stop the kids from coming in from all sides without paying. I won't say that I was one of them, but that fence didn't stop them either. They just dug small holes under the fence and covered the holes with brush. Getting frustrated with a financial loss, the owner then dug a deep ditch, or a moat as you might call it, on the outside of the fence along the perimeter. From that point on, he had to have guards to patrol outside to find the boards that they laid down to cross the moat. By this time, the kids were old enough to have a car and would pack the trunk with kids to get them in for free. Eventually, the owner got it right, and the drive-in started making money. Now, every drive-in has its own problems depending on where it's located, if it's built in the north or south. Now, for the south, there were those pesky mosquitoes again. While sitting in a car, you could hear slaps going on in the other cars near you. It was of two choices: the boyfriend getting fresh with his date, or those mosquitoes, or both. At the concession stand, besides snacks, you could purchase a device to keep the mosquitoes at bay. It was pure poison. It was a ring in a tray that you would light with a match to smolder during the show and made your eyes water badly. It was an advantage for the boyfriends, I guess, because the date couldn't see well enough what the next advance her date would be making. If you came by foot, there were benches in front of the concession stand. It meant easy pickings for the mosquitoes, though. And if you had a date, it wasn't a place for privacy. So I called it a wish I had a date section. Irregardless of all this, it was a fun time. After the show was over, we kids had to walk home in the dark, which was an adventure too. Not wanting to walk the long way home, we would take the shortcut through the woods, which ended in the backyard of a man who had a pack of dogs, just waiting. My cousin Fred said, "Tommy, load your pockets with rocks from the drive-in grounds. We'll need 'em." We left the drive-in by the front of the entrance and crossed the highway. The sky was clear, the moon and stars were shining, and there was a slight fog developing. In the background, you could hear the crickets, and off in the distance, a dog would bark. It's a good thing we didn't see a monster movie that night, or I would have taken the long way home. Through the dark woods, we made our way through. Then came the little creek that was wide enough where you couldn't get across without getting your feet wet. Someone thought of us, though. Someone had been that way before, because they had tied a rope on a limb, and we were able to swing over to the other side. And we were then coming into the old man's backyard who had the dogs. As silently as possible, we tried to slip by without making a noise. Suddenly, one dog barked, and that alerted all the rest. "Throw your rocks," Fred said. "Throw your rocks, Tommy." We all started running. My problem was that I filled all my pockets with the largest rocks I could find, and that was my undoing. The weight of all those rocks were already pulling my pants off the whole trip. I immediately threw everything I had, using the shotgun effect. I was then light as a feather and outran my cousin Fred, which no kid could do in the neighborhood. He was always the fastest kid around until that night. Have you ever had a laughing spasm? We never had such a laugh as we did that night when we got home. I wish to this day I could laugh like that again. Here's to the good old days. Sincerely, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. That is my favorite story so far. I remember as a kid there was a drive-in at the corner of 18th and Andreessen. Many times we would sneak people in, set up lawn chairs in front of the car, and enjoy the heck out of a good movie. That drive-in is gone now, and most of the land is a Winco. However, the old marquee is still there and is a beacon to us that remember the better times. For those of you who don't know, Tom lives in Germany and was raised in the South. He's sent in these tales from his youth. You can expect to hear more of them in upcoming episodes, and I personally can't wait. Thank you, Tom. That is the podcast for this week. Now, you may have noticed a slight gravel in my voice today, and that was due to a bit of a sore throat, so thank you for your patience. Remember that you can find all of the links I mentioned in the podcast in the show notes. I want to thank the contributors this week: Mark Nelson, Tom Williams, Logan Taylor, and Samuel Fuller. You guys are the best. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, it's easy to do. Just head to ronsamazingstories.com. We are on Twitter, Facebook, iTunes, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many other services. Pick one and do leave some feedback about the show. It really does help us to grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.